times. Believe that.
Back like we never left. It's Double Move Sports heading into week 2. Incredible week 1. If you want to get all the breakdowns that we had from week 1, go check that out on our channel. We'll be dropping some clips on that as well. Alex, I'm pumped. We're getting into our starts of the week. The guys that we expect to heavily exceed expectations in week 2. Got a lot to break down here, and then we're going to throw out some deep shots. Maybe some desperation plays if you're in a tight spot. I know there's a lot of guys that appeared on the injury report. It's like hamstrings going down left and right. But, Alex, you ready to get into this stuff?
I am, yeah. Week 2, new slate, new beginnings. If you took the L in week 1, it's still early. There's time to bounce back. I mean, Malcolm Brown and Nyheim Hines were top 5 running backs in week 1, just like we all predicted. So, super excited to get into week 2 here. Oh, man, it's tough with the hamstrings and all the injuries, and it's like if you have 2 healthy hamstrings, you are automatically qualified to be rostered in a fantasy football league. So we'll keep an eye on all the injuries going on as well, but I'm excited to get into some starts of the week and deep shots of the week here for week 2 to get out there and take home the dub this week, in all of my leagues. I won 2 out of 3 last week, hoping I can do the clean sweep here in week 2.
Very nice, very nice. I know you hit on a couple FanDuel lineups. I was pumping out those DraftKings lineup as well. But guys, if you like we're doing here on the show, quick plug, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Pushing for 2,000 here, big milestone for us. We did not think we were going to be hitting that when we started this just last season. So shout out to all you guys. We really appreciate all the support, all the positive comments. Let us know if you have any questions down below. The least we can do is try to help you out here and win week 2. And then lastly, hit us up on Twitter. We're putting out graphics, polls, live reactions during the games. You can hit us up on there to make sure if you have an important question, just slide into the DMs. Sometimes the YouTube comments get a little overloaded. But let's start with our starts of the week. Just to preface, starts of the week are guys that, we're not going to go with these super chalk options.
Patrick
if you have
Mahomes.
Christian McCaffrey, you're starting in. If you have
Lamar
Patrick Mahomes,
Jackson.
you're starting him. If you have Lamar Jackson, you're starting him. You have Ezekiel Elliott, you're starting him. What we're trying to do is get into some of these names where maybe the matchup isn't great, or maybe they had a questionable week 1, and we want to tell you, hey, don't worry about that. Feel free to carry on, plug them back in, and I'll let you start it off. Who is your quarterback start of the week in week 2?
Yeah, my quarterback start of the week actually had a fantastic week 1. He was quarterback 3 on the week. And, going into this season, even through week 1, we've heard all this talk about let Russ cook in Seattle. How about let Josh Allen cook in Baltimore? Josh Allen with 46 passing attempts and 14 carries in week 1 in a game that they dominated against the New York Jets. There was no rhyme or reason for Josh Allen to be throwing the ball 46 times in this game, yet he still did. He's got the green light to run it whenever he wants. He just takes off, and, he did have 2 fumbles in this game. Some of them were pretty laughable, but he's going to have a ton of volume in this offense, and it looks like, at least after week 1, it's going to be a step up from last season. I don't want to overreact and act like this is going to be the norm for Josh Allen, but it was really, really nice to see him step it up a notch. And I think Stephon Diggs is going to be a huge, huge benefactor for Josh Allen. Diggs had a really solid game last week, 8 catches for 86 yards. He's going to work really nicely in tandem with John Brown in that receiving core. And when I look at week 2, they have another soft matchup against the Miami Dolphins. So I look at this game, I expect Josh Allen to be able to move the ball through the air to Stephon Diggs. I know John Brown has been dealing with some hamstring issues. Is it a hamstring? It might be a foot. Either way, John Brown has been in and out of practice. Have to double check on what it is. But either way, I think Josh Allen's going to be able to move the ball through the air on this defense. And the best thing about Josh Allen is the rushing baseline. I mean, 14 carries, 57 yards, and a touchdown last week against the Jets. And if you look at this Miami team, they just gave up 75 yards and 2 touchdowns to Cam Newton in week 1. They had a lot of trouble slowing down that rushing quarterback. So I look at Josh Allen after a really strong start to the year, heading into week 2 against a good matchup, good rushing baseline. He's got weapons around him. I expect Josh Allen to give you another really solid fantasy performance here in week 2.
Nice. I like that. I like that start of the week there. You went with the number 2 option. I'm going with the number 3, and I think one of the biggest themes that we saw in week 1 are these teams that we normally wouldn't think of with tremendous pass volume, like your Seattle Seahawks you mentioned, like the Bills, like the Green Bay Packers. And my start of the week, Aaron Rodgers in another
discount double check, baby.
That's right. In another NFC North battle, a divisional battle. and what should be a much easier matchup in the Detroit Lions. What I loved to see from a fantasy perspective for Aaron Rodgers and the Packers is the Packers went up with a lead early in this game, and they didn't stop passing. I feel like the 2019 Green Bay Packers would have eased off the gas a little bit. Hey, let's just run it up the middle. And you think, like, we had all these offseason narratives about, oh, A.J. Dillon's coming in. That means they're going to run a lot more. Oh, they brought in Jordan Love. Maybe they don't like Aaron Rodgers. They're not going to let him sling it out. Those offseason narratives fell so flat, at least in this first game, when they just roasted the Minnesota Vikings. So I'm expecting there to be just another, easy matchup where Aaron Rodgers can sling it out, where they're getting a lead. Maybe we shouldn't project him to be second on the week again with another, 31 fantasy points. In week 1, he was second in terms of red zone attempts. He had 12 of those. He was fourth on the week in attempts with 44. So if the volume's going to be there for Rodgers, we know he's going to be efficient with it. It's Aaron freaking Rodgers. There's not much more I need to say after that. And he was third on the week in adjusted yards per attempt. So going vertical to MVS, to Allen Lazard, of course, Devontae Adams. And then they have a pretty nice run game. Aaron Jones was facing the lowest stacked box rate in week 1 as well. So I think this offense is going to be able to move, and I think they're going to be able to move with Aaron Rodgers, putting up 35 or more pass attempts in this game. Load him up. If you have a questionable matchup, one I heard was Deshaun Watson against Baltimore. If you're feeling uneasy about that one and you have Aaron Rodgers there, maybe you got him later on in your draft, just plug him in as that safer option. And don't worry about the wheels falling off for Deshaun Watson. So, but I like Rodgers a lot.
I like it. And this Detroit defense just gave up quarterback 8 performance to Mitchell Trubisky in week 1. I know they're getting Jeff Okudah back in the secondary, but they just lost starting corner Justin Coleman. So welcome to the NFL, Jeff Okudah. You get to guard Devontae Adams in your first game without a ton of help. So, I expect Aaron Rodgers to feast in this game. I expect another massive game for Devontae Adams, and Rodgers should be in your lineup with confidence. I love the pick, Steph. So let's go ahead and move on to our running back. Steph, I'm going to let you kick off the running back starts of the week. Here in week 2, who do you got?
So for our starts of the week, right, these aren't super deep names. These aren't supposed to be extremely chalk options, except for in a case where we think that a guy you're already starting is going to explode that much more. And for me, that's Raheem Mostert against the Jets in week 2. Mostert was only on the field for 60% of snaps, but put up 25 fantasy points, had 4 receptions on 6 targets, led the week in receiving yards amongst running backs last week. And we saw what Devin Singletary and Zach Moss were able to do to that Jets defense. I think the sky's the limit for Raheem Mostert. You add in the fact that Kittle is now injured, probably going to be limited if he plays. Brandon Ayuk is out. Deebo Samuel's on IR. There's just not a lot of weapons for Jimmy G to throw to, and so we saw some of that air volume going towards Raheem Mostert. He didn't surpass 2 targets in a game all of last season, and now he's getting whatever it was, 5 or 6 targets there in week 1. I think that's only going to continue now with Kittle being limited right from the jump in what should be an extremely easy matchup for the 49ers. They have a great offensive line. I expect there's to be some super big holes for Mostert to run through.
Yeah, they should lead in this game, which is a great game script for Mostert.
And it's a great game script. That's the other thing I was going to say. They should be leading, just running as much as possible. It's going to be the Trent Taylor and Kendrick Bourne show through the air for Jimmy G. So Jimmy G was my start of the week last week. I'm pivoting off of that and going with Raheem Mostert, who's going to be the other beneficiary when they're running so much. And Mostert still, he looks explosive. I know he's an older guy, undrafted free agent, jumped around to a bunch of different teams. He hit the highest top speed amongst all players in the NFL in week 1. So this man is explosive, and he's going to have the room to run. Plug in Mostert in week 2.
Steph, I love the pick. And, one concern people are going to have potentially is Tevin Coleman. Tevin Coleman wasn't very involved in week 1, only saw 6 snaps. There was a lot of the air quality issues. So the expectation would be going to New York, Tevin Coleman's not going to have to sit out because of some of those health issues. He has a at-risk condition. I believe he has sickle cell, so that's why Tevin Coleman was a little bit limited. So the expectation for me is that Tevin Coleman will actually be more involved. We know Jerick McKinnon was involved as well, But I love the pick, Steph, because there's limited passing options for the 49ers. They should get up in this game early. And even if Coleman gets more involvement, even if McKinnon gets more involvement, Mostert on his own could still see that 15 to 20 carries and a couple of targets as well. So I think, even with other guys in the backfield, Mostert should see a ton of volume in this game. And if you drafted him as your RB3, he had a really good performance last week, and you're wondering whether to pull him up into your lineup off of your bench, I think this is definitely a time to do so. So I love the call. So my running back start of the week, I'm not giving up on this guy yet. It's Ronald Jones. You know, when they signed Leonard Fournette, everyone probably thought Alex and his Ronald Jones hype train has come to a crashing halt. It did not ever stop, Steph. And we look at Ronald Jones this week against the Carolina Panthers, and there's nothing not to like here. I was hyped to see Ronald Jones and his week 1 involvement, even in a tough matchup against the New Orleans Saints. He saw 47% of snaps, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when he was in the game, he was getting the ball. He had 17 carries for 66 yards. And in a tough matchup, that was a far better stat line than Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette had, I believe, 5 carries for 5 yards. Let me spot check. Yeah, 5 carries for 5 yards for Leonard Fournette. And as far as the eye test goes, Ronald Jones looked like the much, much better running back in this game. He also had 2 receptions for 16 yards on 3 targets, even was lined up in the slot a couple times, being utilized in that passing game. So I was really excited to see how much he was used and how much better he looked than Leonard Fournette in week 1. And you look at this matchup against Carolina, you can't ask for a better matchup for a running back. The Panthers just gave up 93 yards and 3 touchdowns to Josh Jacobs. Jacobs had 4 receptions for 46 yards in that game as well. And this Panthers defense, they weren't able to stop anybody on the ground last year. And early on this year, it looks like it's going to be the same story. So now coming into a great matchup, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are a little bit banged up. I think they could really rely on the ground in this game. They're going to rely on these running backs. And against Carolina, even if Fournette gets some more snaps in this game, Ronald Jones, if he gets 15 carries, should be a good bet to get close to 100 yards and fall into the end zone. So I'm all in on Ronald Jones this week against the Panthers, starting him in a couple of leagues this week. And fingers crossed, hoping Ronald Jones can continue to solidify his spot as the number 1 back on this team.
I think that's a great story. And this is the time where you're going to get that value out of Ronald Jones. If you drafted before the Leonard Fournette news, you probably took him in 6th, 7th, 8th round. We had him as a mid-round league winner prior to Fournette coming over. It looks like Fournette's still getting eased in. He didn't look great. It might be a situation where they are trying to build him up and learn this offense. But we saw Adrian Peterson come in 1 week before the season and dominate with the Lions. So I have some questions about Fournette. And until we see that breakout from Fournette on the Buccaneers, I think it's Rojo time, and in a great matchup, he should absolutely eat. Let's talk about our wide receiver starts of the week. Alex, I'll have you go first on this one. Who you got at receiver?
I'm cheating a little bit at the wide receiver position. I'm actually taking 2 guys. I'm taking Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb against the Atlanta Falcons.
No way.
I am. And reason
my
being,
start of the week, let me jump in here. I got to jump in. My start of the week is Amari Cooper, also in this same matchup. So let's just make one really big take on why you need to start all your Cowboys receivers in week 2. This is great.
Yeah, for context's sake, I mean, Amari Cooper, you drafted him to start, and he had a good game last week. I believe he had 14 targets. Correct me if I'm wrong there. So I'll let you, I'm not going to steal your Amari Cooper thunder. So he's more of a lock. I think Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb are more question marks. But the bottom line is this is going to be a high-flying matchup. It's a 52.5 point over-under. Atlanta's defense looks terrible. I mean, they gave up 322 yards and 4 touchdowns to Seattle last week. It doesn't look like they're going to be able to stop anybody. Matt Ryan, threw for 450 yards on 54 attempts. So it looks like Atlanta's going to be one of those teams this season that just airs it out again and again and again. On the Seattle side of the ball last week, we saw both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett have nice games. And on a Cowboys team that doesn't really have a great defense either, I know the pass rush is pretty solid, but I expect them to be in a shootout here. And even last week in a game where Dak Prescott's volume was relatively low to what we're going to expect this season, both Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb cleared 50 yards in that matchup. I know some people were disappointed with the performance for Michael Gallup, only 3 catches for 50 yards. But if that ghost PI call doesn't happen at the end of the game, he actually, turns in like a 10, 11, 12-point performance there. And on the CeeDee Lamb side of things, 5 for 59 on 6 targets in his first game. He was on the field a ton in this one. They used It felt like they were
82% of snaps for CeeDee Lamb.
Felt like they were using 3 wide receiver sets all game long. Now that Blake Jarwin went down with that torn ACL, Dalton Schultz, I mean, the ball was thrown in his vicinity several times. He never did anything with it, whether it was a drop or just like it seemed like he didn't expect the ball to be thrown to him at all. So I expect Dak Prescott to funnel this passing volume through Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, and Amari Cooper. And with those 3 options and in a game where there should be a ton of points, I think you should roll all 3 of them out into your lineup this week. And all 3 could put up top 24 performances all in the same game.
That's so funny that we had all 3 Cowboys wide receivers. You talked about no Jarwin in there. For Amari Cooper, just plug Cooper in. We've seen him have these stretches where he'll just disappear in certain games, but this game script should lead to a lot of pass volume in a soft matchup. And Amari Cooper's the clear number 1. He was 3rd on the week in targets with 14, 3rd on the week with receptions with 10. Actually saw a pretty impressive target share, almost like 40% target share.
Wow.
With 33% of those targets coming in the red zone. So I love the upside for Cooper and why I have him as a start of the week, even though he was a guy that you're probably plugging in every single week anyways, because I think he's going to explode in this matchup as the alpha dog in this Cowboys receiving core. And you talked about the snap counts with CeeDee Lamb. We said 82% for CeeDee. Amari Cooper was out there for 94%, and Michael Gallup was out there for 96% of snaps. So across 3 of the top guys on the depth chart, I don't think you ever see all 3 get above an 80% target share. That almost never happens, and we saw that with the Cowboys. I think that's going to be a recurring theme, and that's in Mike McCarthy's wheelhouse. We saw that in Green Bay when it was the Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb show back in 2012 all the way to 2017. So with McCarthy, I think they're going to keep running this. And then, of course, you have Zeke to help keep moving the ball. I think these drives are going to be long drives. And I think you're going to see Dak take a couple deep shots. I love Gallup in this matchup as well. But I think Cooper's going to get everything in the middle and underneath with CeeDee Lamb.
One last thing to add about this matchup that's just a benefit for the Cowboys versus what they saw in week 1. The Atlanta Falcons don't have Aaron Donald or Jalen Ramsey. So, we all expected a shootout between Dallas and the Rams in week 1. It ended up being a bit of a grind, 20-17 score. I expect, the Falcons side of the ball to kind of dictate this game because that defense is weak. And you look at what Seattle did last week, they actually exposed Atlanta through the air. And Chris Carson only saw 6 carries, Carlos Hyde only 7. I know they're going to feed Zeke in this one, but, Seattle probably saw something in this Atlanta defense that they wanted to expose as a weakness, and it looks like it was that secondary. I expect Dallas to do more of the same in this game. And it should just be a high-volume game all around. Everybody on the Atlanta side, the Dallas side, I'm fine to start in this one.
So let's talk about our tight end starts of the week. Tight ends are it's brutal, man. We had guys like...
It's getting
number 1 on the week,
here.
Dallas Goedert, like we all projected.
Jimmy Graham caught a touchdown.
David Njoku was a top 5 option. But number 7 on the week was my guy, a guy that I almost had as a deep shot this week, but as the week has gone on, I've just become more and more confident. Went back and watched the game film. It's Logan Thomas. It's a guy you may have never heard of. He's a 29-year-old.
This is crazy.
That came into the league as a quarterback out of Virginia Tech, and this is the tight end for the Washington football team. They're up against Arizona. I'll talk about the matchup here in a second, but Logan Thomas, for those who don't know, he's a physical specimen. 6'6", 250 pounds. Almost the same measurables there as Darren Waller. And he was a 4th-round pick. He played on 74% of snaps in week 1 and led the Washington football team in targets, more than Terry McLaurin. Dontrell Inman was out there with 5 targets. Steven Sims only saw 3 in this game, but Logan Thomas looks like he's going to be an option that Dwayne Haskins is going to rely upon. He had 8 targets, caught 4 of them for 37 yards and a touchdown. I think there's upside in that target volume where, if he catches 6 for 8 and does something with those catches, maybe even they are red zone looks, you have a tremendously high upside in Logan Thomas. He was on the field, like I said, 74% of snaps, so high utilization for a guy who wasn't on the team last year and really hasn't been, active playing football in the league very much relative to his age specifically. He tied for 2nd among all tight ends in targets, a 26% target share last week. I'm not trying to project that out for the entire season, but that's what we want to see from an Alpha X wide receiver, that 25%. That's like what guys like Adam Thielen and Julio Jones are getting on a weekly basis. So to see 26% target share for Logan Thomas, that's extremely encouraging to me. He was getting open and Haskins was looking for him. He was 11th on the week in average target distance. So it's not like he's just getting these check down short options near the line of scrimmage. He was running up the seam, looked pretty good out there. And I think in this matchup, the matchup is what is really the icing on the cake and solidifies Logan Thomas as the start of the week. I think the Washington football team is going to be trailing to this Arizona offense that looked explosive in week 1. I know we like Washington's front seven based on what we saw, the new Chase Young experience that they got going up there. It's scary, but I think Arizona's going to be able to move the ball and be explosive here, and it's going to be a great matchup. In 2019, the Arizona Cardinals gave up 16.1 fantasy points a week to the tight end position. That was number 1 by over 4 fantasy points. And last year we were streaming guys like
Jacob Hollister.
Yeah, Jacob Hollister, Ricky Seals-Jones, these deeper names. And so to get a guy who's a starting tight end in the league and is already being utilized heavily, I love it in this matchup. If you had a guy like I did, Blake Jarwin went down, I'm picking up Logan Thomas and I'm plugging him right in there. Alex, are you thinking I'm a crazy person right now with what I'm saying here on such a deep name in Logan Thomas?
A little bit, yeah, but you actually make a pretty good case there. I like a lot of the things you said. You know, the targets are obviously encouraging. The snap counts are encouraging. He played 74% of snaps last week, and the opportunity's there for Logan Thomas. You know, he saw the volume in week 1. You know, it's going to be tough.
He saw the volume in what was a pretty competitive game script. This wasn't a blowout where the Eagles went up big and it was garbage time. This isn't a competitive matchup, so imagine what we could see if Arizona goes up big in week 2.
And it was a low-volume game in terms of this Washington football team's passing offense as well. Haskins, you know, didn't necessarily circle the wagons for 300 yards. But, Steph, I mean, there's a case for starting Logan Thomas. I don't think you go out in week 2 and start him over like a Hunter Henry or, you know, TJ Hawkinson.
Jared Cook.
Yeah, Jared Cook. You don't start him over guys like that, but you make a good point. If you had George Kittle, who's hurt, if he doesn't end up playing on Sunday, if you had Blake Jarwin, maybe Mike Gesicki is sketching you out a little bit after what we've seen from them, I don't mind starting Logan Thomas. You could definitely do worse at the position. Steph, he's only rostered in 6% of leagues right now, so he's going to be available. I know you're probably driving that percentage up from like 3 to 6 because you probably picked him up everywhere.
Definitely.
But check your waiver wire, and if you really need a tight end, if you're in a tough spot, throw the dart on Logan Thomas. Even if you have a bench spot, I mean, that's available, that's someone you're not excited about, pick up Logan Thomas, and if he ends up putting together a couple of good weeks here, you could have a really good trade chip at the position. I've said it all offseason, the tight end position is like musical chairs. There's normally more teams in the league than there are good every week starters at the tight end spot. So if you end up with 2 of them, you end up with a really good trade piece to improve your roster. So a bit of a crazy take.
And when
there.
tight ends break out, they break out hard.
Yep.
You see a guy go from 20th to a top 12 name. Go ahead and just get him on your team early. Stash him if you feel desperate at the tight end spot. But, Alex, I want to hear yours. From what I'm reading here on our show sheet, are you trying to copy me from week 1? Is that what we're doing here?
You did so good in week 1. I just want to be like you, man. And, you know, this isn't the 29-year-old breakout change position tight end like Logan Thomas, but it's all reliable. And Jared Cook at the Las Vegas Raiders. First game in the Death Star out in Vegas. It's going to be cool to see. But Jared Cook, great game last week. 5 catches for 80 yards on 7 targets. You called a really solid plug-and-play start of the week at the tight end spot. Was a tight end 10 on the week. So if you waited in your draft and got Jared Cook, you're pretty happy with that. And this comes down to opportunity. I mean, Michael Thomas is going to be out. So Jared Cook should have massive involvement this week on Monday Night Football from Drew Brees. It's a solid matchup against the Carolina Panthers. You know, that defense, or not against the Carolina Panthers, excuse me, against the Las Vegas Raiders. That game the Raiders had against the Panthers last week was very back and forth. It was a shootout. Both teams were able to do a ton on the offensive side of the ball. So this Raiders defense doesn't necessarily scare me too much here on Monday Night Football. So I look for Jared Cook to see a really good target share this week. I expect him to have touchdown upside. We talked about it last week on the pod. Jared Cook had an insane touchdown rate last year, one that, you know, there's no way he could replicate it this season, but it's great to see him at least in week 1 getting a ton of volume. in a way that could lead to a ton of touchdowns this year. So I think Jared Cook has a ton of upside this week. The volume should provide a higher floor than we're used to with Cook, and you're not just going to be praying for a touchdown for him to have a good fantasy week. I think the floor is going to be there, and if the touchdown comes, you're actually going to end up with a ton of upside and a potential top 5 option here in week 2.
So let's move over to our deep shots of the week. This is one of our favorite segments on the show where we get to throw out these deep names, these hot takes, guys that are not rostered. We're not saying these are our waiver pickups of the week. These are more desperation shots. These are DFS plays. These are just guys that we like that you would not expect to have a good game. And the first one here, admittedly, it's pretty gross, but I want to come out hot to start the year. My deep shot of the week is a quarterback, and it's Mitch Trubisky against the Giants in a very similar matchup to what we just saw against Detroit. On the road in Detroit, Mitchell Trubisky threw the ball 36 times, completed 20 of those attempts, so only a 55% completion rate, 242 yards, though, and 3 touchdowns. And then he had 3 carries on the ground for 26 yards. That was a 25-point fantasy week from Mitch Trubisky. And as gross of a name as he is, as much as we don't like him as a long-term starter in this league, I hate him in a dynasty unless you can get him extremely low, because I don't think he's going to be a starter for that much longer unless he just completely changes who he is as a player.
Calling me out, Steph. I've got him in our dynasty league. You know this.
Shots fired. But when he plays, he's had fantasy value. This is a high-flying matchup. I think he's going to rush more in this game. We saw Big Ben have 3 rushes as well, and that's a guy that is more torso than he is lower body. So I think
the old Mr. Incredible build.
Exactly. Trubisky has a little bit more athletic ability, and he was slinging it. He was third on the week. He had 6 deep ball attempts in that game, where Allen Robinson had a pretty quiet week, so expect big things from Anthony Miller as well in this matchup. I like him as a kind of deeper spot start guy, flex option. And Trubisky was also 3rd in red zone attempts. So without David Montgomery in there, it's not like they get into the red zone and start cramming it up the middle. They're asking Trubisky to find ways to score when they get down there. Part of that could also be them constantly being in 3rd down situations in the red zone. But nonetheless, I like Trubisky as a spot start. I have him in some DFS options where I'm plugging in some of our more chalk picks like Ezekiel Elliott. I think Derrick Henry is going to eat this week, and Aaron Jones is going to dominate as well. I got all 3 of those guys in my DraftKings lineups because I was able to put Mitch Trubisky in at quarterback with a ton of upside this week. So I know it's a gross one, but when Trubisky breaks out again in week 2, you heard it here first.
For sure, and that's why we wait on quarterbacks. You can stream a guy like Mitch Trubisky, and last week he was the quarterback 8 on the week. Hopefully he gets there again for the sake of this deep shot of the week take, Steph. But I'm going to go with someone who's a little bit deeper. And I know Mitch Trubisky is only rostered in 8% of leagues, so that was pretty solid there. But I'm going to go with Danny Amendola, only rostered in 9% of leagues. And I think you could do a lot worse at your flex in a PPR league if you're in a really deep pinch. There's a ton of guys this week with questionable status. Devontae Parker, Kenny Golladay, Chris Godwin, Cortland Sutton, Mike Evans, Jamison Crowder, the list goes on and on. By the time you're listening to this, maybe we have some clarity on a couple of those guys. Most of them seem like they're hamstring injuries. So hopefully we have some clarity and you can prepare going into the week. And I'm sure news has broken, in the couple days or hours or whatever it is till you're watching this. But if you get to Sunday and it's a game time decision and you have one of those guys that's out and you're in a pinch and you don't know what to do, instead of tilting and going with some terrible option on the waiver wire that's all upside, why not go with Danny Amendola, who can get you a very solid high floor game in your flex. And with Kenny G being one of those guys that could be out this week as of right now, or he could be out there playing but limited, I think Danny Amendola is a good option either way. Danny had 5 catches for 81 yards in week 1. That was on 7 targets, a tough matchup against the Bears defense. So if he's getting you 13 PPR points in your flex as someone who you can just go pick up off the waiver wire anytime, that's pretty solid. And this week he gets a much better matchup at the Green Bay Packers. Packers were in a high-flying game last week. We talked about Rodgers a little bit earlier on the pod, and we expect him to do big things this week against the Lions. So I expect it to be a pretty pass-heavy game script for the Detroit side of the ball. And the thing is, Danny Amendola has actually proven to be a PPR machine throughout his whole career, and he can be hit or miss sometimes, but he's proven to have really, really solid pop games. And when we look at 2019, he had 4 games of 17 PPR points or more, averaged 6 targets a game last season. So, if you're in a desperation situation, Amendola could be plugged in and have you a really solid week. I don't think he's going to take the top off and go for 30 points. That's not the kind of deep shot this is. This isn't the Darius Slayton, level of deep shot, the Deshaun Jackson, the guy who's going to go for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. But if you're looking for a floor play that has the potential to get close to 20 points, I think there's a lot worse options out there than Danny Amendola.
We love plugging in these, high floor slot guys, like Steven Sims, like we were last year, and Danny Amendola fits right into that for all those reasons. So I think you made a pretty good case there. If you're desperate, if you need a flex filler, something like that, plug Danny Amendola in there. I love that. Let me talk about my second and final deep shot of the week. It's another wide receiver. It's a guy that I took some victory laps on last year. I was plugging him in 3 or 4 weeks back to back to back, and it's Russell Gage out of the Atlanta Falcons. He's the number 3 wide receiver there behind Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, but they're against Dallas this week. We've talked about how much we love that matchup on both sides of the ball. It should be a high-flying matchup, and I think Matt Ryan's going to need to get the ball out quick with this Cowboys pass rush coming in. I think Russell Gage is going to suck in a lot of the underneath volume playing from the slot. He is their primary slot guy, and we talked about some of the snap rates with the 3 wide receivers on the Cowboys side of the ball. Atlanta operates very similarly. Calvin Ridley, 86%. Julio Jones, 82%. Russell Gage, 70%. So for a guy who's 3rd on the depth chart, he's out there a ton. He was 5th on the week in terms of total number of routes run. Matt Ryan, in a matchup against the Seahawks, it was a high-flying game script, just like we expect this one to be, or at least hope this one will be. He led the league in pass attempts with 54 and led the league in pass yardage with 450. So this is going to be a high-volume offense. Saw 12 targets last week. That was 5th amongst all wide receivers. So for a guy that's going to be in a great situation, I'm not necessarily in love with the talent that Gage has, but he's in a great situation and he's relatively efficient. 5th on the week in week 1 with yards after the catch with 46 total of those. And I expect him to be relied upon in this matchup. Could even get into the end zone as well. Plug in Russell Gage at your flex or plug him in as a deep DFS option. I love him this week against Dallas.
Yeah, Steph, I love the pick, and I know we talked a little bit about the Cowboys-Falcons game earlier on the pod. Bottom line, put your wide receivers in from this game on both sides of the ball. They go 3 deep, and I think Russell Gage is a candidate to have a really nice game. And you look at what he did to end last season as well. You talked about how you were rolling him out on a weekly basis. Over the last 6 games of last season, Russell Gage averaged 11.4 fantasy points per game. So he was getting it done. That was more fantasy points per game over that stretch than Cortland Sutton, than DK Metcalf, right behind Tyreek Hill. So he was getting it done. So this isn't just like a one-hit wonder for Russell Gage. He's going to have involvement in this offense. I think Hayden Hurst and Russell Gage could go back and forth as far as fantasy-relevant weeks. But from a floor perspective, I think Russell Gage is a lock to get 5 or 6 targets in this game minimum, and hopefully we see what we saw in week 1, which was the 12-target performance. So I'll go ahead and go with my second deep shot of the week. It's Jerick McKinnon at the New York Jets.
Jet, baby!
We talked about Raheem Mostert in the starts of the week section as your running back choice, but Jerick McKinnon, man, he is back like he never left, even though he definitely was gone there for a couple of years. But it was nice to see him out there and looking healthy in week 1.
Good.
We were like, this is a guy where you kind of got to see it to believe it after he's been out of the league for a couple of years with those knee issues. But in week 1, he had 31% of snaps, which I know isn't anything crazy, but 3 carries for 24 yards rushing, great efficiency there. And then through the air, he had 5 targets, 3 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown on those targets. So Jerick McKinnon, I doubt you started him in week 1, and for the few people that did, or if you had him in DFS, he put up a solid performance for where you got him. And here in week 2, we talked about this matchup. The Jets are terrible. Their defense is terrible. And the 49ers pass catching group is absolutely decimated. So this is a bit of a desperation play. I know with 31% of snaps, you're not necessarily targeting Jerick McKinnon in your starting lineup. Tevin Coleman should see more involvement as well. But in a game where George Kittle could be out or limited, Debo is out, the list goes on. Jalen Hurd is out for the season. Travis Benjamin opted out. Brandon Ayuk is banged up. He's got some issues. So I think Jerick McKinnon will be involved again as a pass catcher in this game. Jimmy G seemed like he could rely on him there in week 1. And Jerick McKinnon's only rostered in 18% of leagues. So if you're really in a tough position at running back and you're in a PPR league, roll Jerick McKinnon out there. Hope he gets 5 or 6 targets in this game. He should see some work on the ground as well, especially if the 49ers jump out to a lead. And he's got a good shot to get into the end zone again. So Jerick McKinnon, my second deep shot of the week for week 2.
What I think is a really sneaky part of plugging in Jet against the Jets is they were using Jerick McKinnon in the slot. And if George Kittle's not going to be out there, there's some interesting ways that he could be utilized in this offense, especially with no Debo. You know, we talk about how Debo gets used as a gadget player, even though he is a guy who can operate as an X wide receiver 1 on the outside, but they still use him in these interesting ways. I think we could see some of that with Jerick McKinnon lining up in the slot, getting more usage in the pass game. And I know he only got 3 carries, but he looked good on those carries, 8 yards per attempt. And he got some red zone touches. He actually got 5 red zone touches. So if he gets into the end zone here with some of that volume in this super easy matchup, I love Jerick McKinnon for all the same reasons. I'm smashing on Raheem Mostert in week 2. But Alex, I think that wraps it up for our week 2 starts of the week and our deep shots of the week.
Let's go.
Going to be so interesting to see of the week 1 narratives and things that we saw, what things kind of fall to the wayside, which things are, initial gut reactions or responses. Think of a guy like Paris Campbell. We saw a lot to like. We saw a lot to like out of Joe Burrow. We'll see if those things continue or if maybe it was just something that was matchup or game script dependent. A lot of interesting narratives here. A lot of good matchups here. A lot of very soft matchups. So the stage is set for a lot of bounce backs in week 2. Keep plugging in your Austin Ecklers, your Joe Mixons, some of the guys you were disappointed by. But Alex, anything else to say here before we sign off?
Good luck out there, everybody. It's week 2. It's a new beginning. Don't tilt too hard yet. If you drafted your studs, roll them out there. I'm sick of seeing questions that are like, do I start Austin Eckler or like Malcolm Brown in week 2? And while Malcolm Brown's a great waiver pickup, you start your studs. It's too early to overreact. So keep that in mind as you're rolling out these lineups. But as always, if you've got any questions, you just want confirmation on some start-sit decisions, throw them in the comments. We're going to be here all week, every week, answering those for you guys throughout the season. So super hyped for week 2. Let's go get some dubs this week.
Thank you guys for listening and watching. Hit that sub and that like button, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.
Peace.